Good morning, everyone. Don't you love conservative parties when they blame big business right after they blame big government? You know, we're going to take on those big business guys. Here's Aaron O'Toole in one of his first videos here for Labor Day. Here we go.
Too many people are living on the brink, living in quiet desperation. For them, there isn't a lot to celebrate this Labor Day. Part of the problem is big government, one that signs bad trade deals with the US and countries like China, or that kills entire industries by saying they're going to phase out the energy sector. But part of the problem is big business, corporate and financial power brokers who care more about their shareholders than their employees. They love trade deals with China that allow them to access cheap labor. Under my leadership, Conservatives will introduce Canada First.
Sorry, my microphone didn't want to turn on. Right, big business, those people who are looking after their stockholders and their shareholders first and not their employees, right? The Conservatives getting on this bandwagon, right? It's in Canada First economic strategy. This has been an interesting thing because the manufacturing has been removed from Ontario systemically since like the mid 90s, right? Or 80s earlier, right? Even paying big corporations to keep manufacturing in Ontario isn't even working anymore. So, you know, like the Canada First economic strategy is fine branding, but the reality of it is really different than what people think they're getting, right? And so, I mean, this is Aaron O'Toole's Labor Day message. That's just one piece of it, but I think that it's notable to see the Conservative Party taking aim at big business, right? Isn't that something? That's something, right? Happy Labor Day, everyone. You look at those big business fat cats, right? We'll fix it. Just let us be the government. We'll fix it. O'Toole names shadow cabinet with Rempel, Poilievre, and Stubbs in key pandemic positions. Here's the breakdown of that. So Aaron O'Toole's got his House of Commons leadership team, and then his cabinet ministers. In cabinet is Poilievre in finance. He's got Chong in foreign affairs. He's got Chiu, I think that's how you say that, in diversity, inclusion, and youth. There's all sorts of cabinet positions there and a leadership team. I think he's doing well with rolling it out, and the people he's got in top positions are well known to Canadians. I think that's important. So where's Derek Sloan? I heard people say, where's Derek Sloan? He's notably absent, not there, right? So who knows what this fall will bring? I don't know. But as Scheer did, it looks like O'Toole is setting up very center party, big tent, big blue tent idea, and going for the Canadian aw shucks group, right? Like the Canadian. There's a term I'm looking for. Hold on, let me think about it. That image of the humble Canadian, right? He served in the forces. He's been in the private sector, been a lawyer, been an MP, done all of these things, and so I think that's the image he's going for, right? He says, "I grew up in Bowmanville, Ontario, in a General Motors family." That's the opening of his intro here, and that's the way he's going to try and appeal to everyone. This is a pivot, right? This is pivoting away from the leadership race and appealing to the Conservatives, and now he's trying to pivot and appeal to the general populace. And I don't think he's going to work. I don't think he's going to win on the same way that Justin Trudeau did. Justin Trudeau is a personality cult. I don't think the Conservatives have that. Trump is a personality cult, right? Like you follow Trump, or you love or you hate Trump, right? You love or you hate Trudeau, and you show up to vote for them. I think Scheer. I almost said I did say Scheer. I think O'Toole, right, is. I think he has to rely on his experience. I think he has to rely on the. Who's that Mountie? What's the Mountie's name? Somebody remind me in the comments the Mountie's name. Not Dudley Do Right. I don't think it's Dudley Do Right. It's the other one. I looked it up. It's Dudley Do Right. I was wrong. Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, that's the kind of image, and that's not a cult of personality, right? You don't get that from that. So interesting. We'll see. The Conservatives are firing on all cylinders, trying to get things back to being investigated. They're saying that they're going to investigate when the Parliament reopens. Here they are on September 6th. Today is the 8th. Conservatives request ethics probe into Telford's senior advisor as PMO denies wrongdoing. The PMO always denies wrongdoing. In SNC Lavalin, they denied wrongdoing. In everything, they deny wrongdoing until they can't deny wrongdoing anymore. And then Trudeau says, we can all learn from this. Or he growls it maybe. Okay, back to this. Or moving on. Here is a ambitious homeless housing plan. Okay, great to see so many homeless have been moved into smaller hotels that were closed because of a lack of business. Trudeau considering ambitious homelessness plan in wake of COVID-19. I said Trudeau, I meant Toronto. Toronto considering ambitious homelessness plan in wake of COVID-19 pandemic. And here's the article. Toronto is considering an ambitious new plan to combat homelessness as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate the issue. In a draft report developed by the Shelter, Support and Housing Administration in conjunction with the United Way, city officials have put forward a number of potential strategies to get people off the street and keep them housed. One of the primary ideas suggested in the report is for the city to lease and purchase old buildings and office spaces to be converted into permanent housing. Where have we seen that before? USSC? Okay. Other proposals include the transformation of existing emergency shelter spaces into permanent housing units, the rapid construction of modular housing, and the creation of a more robust network of harm reduction and addiction resources. The report does not give an idea of how much money would be needed to make the plan a reality, but Toronto MP Adam Vaughan says it would likely cost hundreds of millions of dollars per year. Vaughan, an advocate for increased public spending on housing, acknowledges the price tag may upset residents worried about higher taxes, but says the end result would significantly cut costs already allocated to treating the symptoms of homelessness as well as improving society as a whole. A homeless person is just a neighbor without a house. When you house them, they turn into neighbors, and none of us talk about our neighbors that way, Vaughan says. Vaughan does not understand that homelessness is not like a single problem, right? Like usually if you're homeless, that's a result of other issues that are impacting you. And giving somebody a house doesn't solve their problems. I'm sorry, it just doesn't, right? Like, it just doesn't. Okay, get back to this. And another person interviewed in this article, and I'm going to talk about it, references the other issues that homeless people face. And I just think it's really tone deaf for Vaughan to frame it in this light. It's really, really, it doesn't at all respect all of the different contributing factors that go into that person being homeless. Oh, here's a house fixed. Now you're a neighbor. Come on, man. Back to this. I scroll down. Although 2 of the 3 leased buildings in the area are now vacant, the one remaining site, the Roehampton Hotel, has been the target of protests by some local residents. A formerly homeless resident who lived in one of the now vacant buildings, Rob Dodds, said he understands the concerns that residents in the areas have and points out it's not just them who have felt unsafe around the leased buildings. Dodds, who now lives in a subsidized building closer to downtown, said the problem lies in the fact that homeless people are often painted with one brush and housed together in a single space without consideration of their individual needs or potential for conflict. He says staying in shelters are no fun. There's a lot of mental health issues, addiction issues, aggression issues. It's not one person's fault, but it gets messy when everyone gets put together like that. Crow and Vaughan agree, arguing that a successful strategy in the fight against homelessness will be one that spreads affordable housing out across the city rather than centralizing it in a small handful of buildings. Using the current tension over the Roehampton Hotel as an example, the two said the city failed to anticipate the blowback from moving hundreds of the city's homeless into the neighborhood so quickly, potentially jeopardizing future attempts at converting buildings into permanent housing. So he says here there's mental health issues, there's aggression issues, addiction issues, and other various issues that go along with being homeless and usually are contributing factors to being homeless, and throwing hundreds of them into a single neighborhood and saying, now your problem's solved, you've got an apartment and we'll drop off groceries and have fun and don't, be good, totally misses the point and the contributing factors and the fact that that's not really taking care of people, right? That's not really taking care of people. Sure, it's giving them housing, but it's not really taking care of people. And yes, I understand that taking care of people costs more, but you shouldn't just rent giant buildings and then say, problem solved. Morons. You should have somebody who's worked in addictions and isn't completely blinded by the Marxist garbage blowing out of everyone's butthole. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I worked in these fields and all through the 2000s and into the 2010s. I left the school board in around 2015 because of this trash making its rounds. People not even understanding that that's not how you solve a problem, right? Addiction is more about, well, I'll not get into that, but if you haven't seen Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong, you should check that out. It's about human connection, right? If the first time you take an opiate, you're addicted, which is the current kind of model that people use, then everybody who came back from Vietnam would have been addicted soldiers, right? Because a lot of people used opiates in Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. But when they came back, they were family people, right? And some people had issues, and that's not an insignificant amount of people who came back from Vietnam having issues. And I'm not trying to undermine that, but what I'm trying to say is addiction's more about human connection and dealing with a lack of human connection than it is about here's a house, right? All that does is take care of one minor problem in a cornucopia of other issues that are plaguing that person, and pretending that you can put hundreds of them into a building or two or three and solve their problems that way is just folly. You might solve one problem, but you are not addressing 10 or 12 others. And in not addressing them, you're forcing the community to deal with people who are defecating next to daycares. Come on. Moving to Guelph, here, Guelph Motel may be turned into supportive housing for the homeless, because they looked at that idea and thought, man, we want to shoot ourselves in the foot too. Gail Hoekstra, executive director of the Welcome In Drop-In Center, revealed the organization is looking at a major housing project of its own. According to Hoekstra, the center currently has a non-competitive purchase agreement with the owners of the Parkview Motel on Woolwich Street, south of Woodlawn Road, to purchase the motel and convert it into a supportive housing for the city's homeless. Right down the street is Riverside Park, probably the signature park of the city. Like right down here is a carousel and the train that kids ride, literally a parking lot and a couple of buildings away. Do we want to have this? Has anybody been asked about this? I have the answer to that. I'll show you in a sec. Okay. Back to this. The price tag for the purchase is $3.8 million, with Hoekstra saying the center is prepared to leverage our assets for purchase, but would need an additional $500,000, $540,000 in order to secure a down payment. Man, well, can't wait to hear how Guelph taxpayers are helping that out. Here's the follow-up. August 31st, they have not engaged us. Guelph Neighborhood says they weren't told about drop-in centers' supportive housing plans. When one organization's plans to buy a motel and turn it to housing for the homeless was brought forward at the August 24th council meeting, it was the first many in the community had heard about the idea, including at least one of the councillors of the ward where that motel stands. So I was getting calls starting the next morning from people saying, what the heck is going on? I never heard about this. And I have to say, I didn't either. Councillor James Gordon, one of Ward 2's two councillors, told the Mercury Tribune. During public delegations at the council meeting around a request for the St. Joseph's Housing Corporation for $800,000 from the city for its Silver Maple Affordable Seniors Housing Project, Gail Hoekstra, executive director of the the Welcome In Drop-In Center, told council that the organization has a deal in place to buy the Parkview Motel for $3.8 million and turn it into supportive housing. It was shocking, Councillor Rodrigo Gollier said Monday afternoon. It's disappointing that the information on this proposal didn't come through staff. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there. So Guelph wants to join the club of outraging neighborhoods for housing homeless people. And again, the problem that I have with this is not that we're housing homeless people necessarily, but that we are not solving any of the real issues. We're just solving one issue and pretending that that fixes it. And the reality is that actually dealing with the mental health and addiction issues, again, I worked in this field, is very expensive to get the expertise, and the staff burnout is really high. So having experienced and good enough staff to actually do the job is difficult at the best of times. And I just don't see how making more permanent a situation like here's your house. There you go. What do I have to do for this? And the whole program, the width and breadth of it is in flux, right? There's a lot of, I know that they're using taxis to drive people to and from the safe injection sites. I know that that's taxpayer funded. I know that people are very proud of these programs and they're really excited about them. And when you engage them, they want to tell you about them until you get into the nitty gritty of why are the safe injection sites increasing the number of dead? They don't like hearing that. Like they don't like facing the reality of this, right? Like what we're getting out of this is not at all what's being promised. And so what are we getting out of this, right? What are we going to get out of this? Can't wait to go to the carousel when it's overrun by a bunch of people shooting up drugs. Oh wait, no, they'll go to the safe injection site, right? Thank goodness. But how are we going to pay for it, right? Here's an April 23rd reminder, and this year, the government's kicked in, $10 billion, maybe $5 billion to divvy up, and everybody was very happy about this. April 23rd, here's the report. Municipalities seek emergency funding. Pushed to the brink of the financial crisis, municipalities nationwide are calling for emergency federal funding to continue supporting Canadians through the COVID-19 pandemic. That call comes as an urgent written appeal today from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities from turning arenas into safe shelters to deferring property taxes. Municipal leaders are working flat out to support Canadians through this pandemic, said FCM President Bill Karsten. But with new expenses, staggering drops in revenue, and no freedom to run deficits, municipalities need emergency funding to keep essential services going strong. FCM's data shows municipalities facing a minimum of $10 to $15 billion in near-term non-recoverable losses due to COVID-19. That figure includes foregone property taxes, utility charges, and user fees, including an estimated $400 million each month from lost transit ridership alone. At the same time, municipalities are taking unprecedented steps to support public health and safety. So, where are we getting the money? Where are we getting the money? Are the property taxes just going to go up by, how much do they need? $500,000? Okay, yeah, man, no problem. Let's just start paying for that. And where's the stop, right? And here's the CTV, and not that I believe CTV. They're very propagandistic lately. And Nano's polls are suspect at best. But anyways, regardless, taking all of this with a grain of salt, Canadians concerned about deficits split on Fed's ability to rebuild economy. Yes, rebuilding the economy on the green ticket, right? That's what we're going to do. Most Canadians are concerned about the ballooning federal deficit amid the COVID-19 pandemic, but are divided on if they have confidence in the federal government to rebuild the economy, according to a new survey by Nanos Research. I scroll down on this question. Okay, Nanos found that Canadians are much more divided on whether they are confident the federal government has a plan to build a strong and environmentally sound economy. Everybody's getting the environmentally sound there. On this question, Nanos found a near perfect split, with 49% saying they're either confident, 11%, or somewhat confident, 38%. The government has such a plan, with 47% responding they're either somewhat not confident, 22%, or not confident, 25%. The Liberal government has, to this point, offered little in way of specifics about how it plans to rebuild the economy coming out of the pandemic. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that a roadmap to recovery will be detailed when Parliament resumes, with a throne speech on September 23rd. And here's what Bill Tufts said. He says, Trudeau promises a green reset and transformational change. What he is bringing at the throne speech: UBI, universal basic income, social enterprise, mandatory vaccine, patriot censorship. I don't know what that is. Universal healthcare, unleashed immigration, huge income and equity tax. What do you see coming? That's his speculation. Here's Laurie Goldstein. He says, when Justin Trudeau unveils his green economic recovery plan in the throne speech later this month, and the usual suspects praise it, remember the praise showered on Dalton McGuinty's Green Act in 2009, see below. Then remember the disaster that followed, planting the seeds of green energy. From former policy advisor Marianne Fraser credits George Smitherman for Ontario's tilt towards green energy. Smitherman credits Dalton McGuinty. McGuinty sees jobs in renewable energy expansion, right? So these are all articles that are saying it's going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. Here's Dan McTeague, gas price wizard. He says, written 9 years ago by Patrick Gallant, like Ontario, then green taxpayer-funded groups are using the same strategy to bamboozle Canadians out of their livelihoods. The big green surge to fend off critics of Ontario's renewable energy. Blah, blah. Tongue twister today. The big green surge. Yeah, I'm not going to read that again. The Ontario Minister of Energy, Brad Duguid, excuse me if I've got that wrong, Progress Report 2011 had this message when it was released July 6, 2011. Ontario is leading the way when it comes to producing reliable energy from clean, renewable sources. This declaration was preceded by a surge of studies, pronouncements, press releases, campaigns, interviews, website launches from numerous large and small environmental NGOs, ENGOs, out to save the planet from man-made global warming as predicted by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The ENGOs, along with their industrial allies, are concerned that the milk wagon, that is the feed-in tariff FIT program, will no longer stop at their door if the Liberal government of Dalton McGuinty should lose the election this fall. As a result, the ENGOs are flooding the system with studies supporting wind and solar generation. Needless to say, the conclusions in these efforts are almost identical and support wind and solar generation as the savior of our planet. In no particular order, over the last 6 months, we've had a WWF, another WWF. These are all studies, Suzuki Foundation, that report basically that solar and wind are the new generation, and we can all survive on solar and wind. They haven't seen Planet of the Humans because this was published in 2011. But I want you to notice how it's the same strategy. They're using the same strategy. Anything that they want to push, they just get a bunch of reports by think tanks that are more than happy because they're getting kickbacks from the government that's gonna put in place the funding of these exact places. And how do I know that? Well, it's listed here. So these are all studies that were put together by different NGOs. All of them are linked. Okay, so you can read through that. Link is in the description. The foregoing represents the major reports and statements from the well-known doomsayers meant to win the hearts and minds of voters as we get closer to the provincial election date in October. It is an all-out effort to save the Green Energy Act that most of them worked hard to create through the GEAA, but doesn't include those behind the scenes like Tides Canada, who have established an Energy Initiative Advisory Board. I scroll down. This is just a list of who's who at the ENGOs and the kickbacks and all this money. I'm not going to read it because it feels like reading baseball statistics. Like very quickly you stop listening because you can't conceive of the words in your head. Okay, back to this. Reverting back to those aforementioned studies, note that all point us in the same direction. Wind and solar renewable energy will save the world. I will leave it to others to analyze those rehashed ideas and concepts as originally proposed by the David Suzuki's and Al Gore's of the world based on faulty science of the UN's IPCC and backed up by the citations on studies they created. I and many of my fellow humans are not ready to accept those premises and suggest that we stop funding these ENGOs with our tax dollars. To know that the likes of Greenpeace, Penvia, the Syria Club, Ontario Sustainable Energy Association, World Wildlife Fund, CAPE, Environmental Defense, Suzuki Foundation, Tides Canada, Canada WEA, and the hundreds of other of like-minded hold such sway over our democratically elected local municipal councillors, our MPPs, and our MPs is an affront to our rights and will, left unchecked, drive us all to energy poverty. From 2020, you were very right. Back to this. It's time to depoliticize the energy sector and put it back in the hands of those who actually understand it and who will do it as logical and economically feasible for the benefit of the entire population. Yesterday, I fear it's far too late for that. Here is a reminder that yesterday, the Department of Environment in California issued emergency orders for California Power Grid, waiving pollution regulations for select plants so grid operators, Casio, could avoid power shortfalls. So they had to waive their environmental standards in order to spin up enough power so they could avoid brownouts, but they were telling everybody to turn off everything, turn your air conditioner up to 78 degrees and blah, 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 in order to avoid blackouts or rolling blackouts because of their green energy disaster that doesn't provide enough energy for the state, right? And people in Florida were saying, haha, California, we've got energy and it's hot here too. Back to Canada, this is from the former head of the Eco-Feasel Commission and from the end of May. Good time to dust this off. Engineering a green recovery is a terrible idea. Now, this article lists two reasons. I think it's a concern troll article. I'm not going to read it because I'm already long, but it's a concern troll article because this is published May 31st in the Globe and Mail. It's an opinion piece, and he goes through and says why engineering a green recovery is a terrible idea, but he says that we should triple the carbon tax. He finishes off the article. Basically, he says, first, this is a terrible idea for three reasons. First, it's not clear that a conventional package of stimulus policies is at all appropriate. We aren't living through a normal economic recession in which private firms and households need to be induced by government fiscal and monetary policies to produce and spend. Instead, we're living through an intentional shutdown of the economy, and monetary and fiscal policies are being used aggressively to provide financial relief until incomes resume, which will occur when we have all returned to work. So he's identifying that this isn't normal. Second, even if conventional stimulus policies were needed, is engineering a green recovery such a good idea? If spending massively on green infrastructure is a good idea today, then surely it was a good idea 6 months ago. But is this true? If the government had come into a windfall of tens of billions of dollars in 2019, would its best use have been to spend it on dozens of green infrastructure projects or low carbon subsidies or tax credits for green investments? The answer is no, mostly because such policies are just more examples of the government trying to pick winners in the marketplace, and governments are bad at doing that. But then he makes a full-throated argument for tripling the carbon tax or more here. So I was confused by that. I was like, what? Reading through the whole thing, I was like, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. So that's why I think it's a concern troll article, because when you agree and agree and agree, and then you get to the last bit and you're like, okay, I agreed with you up until that point. Anyway, could be nothing. Could just be a confused writer, but it seemed thought out. Calgary's unemployment rate the highest in Canada for the second straight month. Not going to get into it, but links in the description. That seems like a bad indicator. Yeah. Air Canada. This is kind of funny to me. Masks with an acceleration valve have been deemed ineffective in protection against COVID-19, according to requirements outlined by Transport Canada. As such, they no longer qualify as acceptable face coverings when traveling with us. So if you've got one of those with a ventilator hole, because the whole point was... And it's funny, right? It's like seeing people walk around with a mask around their nose, because the whole point is it's to be used as source control, meaning you're preventing yourself from like spitting all over everything. And the valve negates the whole purpose of the mask because it doesn't filter anything going out, right? And I mean, really, the mask doesn't filter anything anyway, because you're exhaling outside of there. It's not going out through the mask. Anyway, regardless, the whole COVID-19 thing is crazy, and I think it's wild that there are private corporations, companies that are allowed to mandate medical devices in order to use their plane. I think that's got to be against a law or something, right? It should be. City of Vancouver. Did you know the Vancouver Police Department can fine people $200 for not adhering to COVID-19 physical distancing requirements per the province's new legislation? Oh man, great that they're legislating this now. What, 6-7 months after the pandemic? Wonderful. Can't wait until next year when we're not allowed to leave our houses for fear of what? Car accidents? Ugh, it's so terrible. Terrible. Draconian. Terrible. NFL has 77 false positive coronavirus tests from New Jersey lab. If even the NFL is getting false positives at this rate, the tests are no good. Throw them out. And it's a case-demic anyway. People aren't dying. There's cases everywhere, but nobody's going to the hospital. But there's cases. They might go to the hospital. The UN is anti-male. They've got the same problem the Upper Grand District School Board has. The Upper Grand District School Board is saying that it's racist because people who kids don't have teachers who look like them, right? And I said, well, what about males? I said, males don't have teachers who are male either. So is that anti-male of the Upper Grand District School Board? And that was a confusing question for the person I was speaking with. They said, oh, you're right, males don't apply. I said, right, you've got demographics. The city, anyway. We were talking about something else. I'll get into it. I've finally cracked my documentary, how I'm going to approach it. So it's going to be multi day. Anyway, I'm going to tell the story. So that's exciting. The story of my conversation with the Upper Grand District School Board about critical race theory, just in case you're not sure what I'm talking about. So anyway, the United Nations is anti-male. They put out this tweet yesterday, and here it is. They say, the COVID-19 pandemic is demonstrating what we all know. Millennia of patriarchy have resulted in a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture, which damages everyone, women, men, girls, and boys. I think that we have a culture which is the most advanced and peaceful culture that abhors racism and human trafficking and slavery. And this has been built by men and women, not just men. Men didn't build this while women were sitting around doing nothing. Women do a very important job, and men and women are a team, whether these people in the United Nations or the people at the Upper Grand District School Board or the people in the municipal governments or the provincial governments or the federal governments recognize it. Women weren't exploited by men. Men and women have been a team for as long as men and women have existed and couldn't exist without each other. And it's such an insane thing to say, look at what these evil men have done. They built the most peaceful society in the history of the world with tolerance and inclusivity. At the core, being called a racist in our current society is considered a really big insult, right? Like, this is a thing. And that is the awful society that the United Nations is trying to pin on awful, terrible men. Here's the management team of the United Nations. Those awful men. I mean, I think I have an idea of why they think this. I was like, oh, I was expecting to see a lot of men. I don't know why I was expecting to see a lot of men, but there are not a lot of men on this leadership team that have just come out against men, those evil patriarchal men. Whew, awful, right? Sorry if I'm scrolling too fast. Oh, here's some men. Not very many men in the leadership of the United Nations. And regardless, I'm not asking for 50% equality. Other people ask for 50% equality. That's not what I'm asking for. I just want the best person for the job in the job, right? Based on this tweet, that's not true. That is not happening currently. They're very ideologically driven, and putting this tweet out, and it's not a parody. They're not like immediately saying, oh, we're sorry about that. Like, that's 50% of the population. Imagine putting something like this out about women, right? Just imagine. Unbelievable. What a world. What a world that we live in. So the draconian controls march on. The COVID-19 continues to diminish. And yet the governments around the world are doing everything they can to continue controlling people. It's very interesting to live through. Very interesting. Kids are going back to school. The doomsday people are realizing that kids have to live in the world that they're creating, right? So kids are coming back to school. I've talked to teachers in the last couple of days. That's been interesting too. So, I hope that things calm down. I hope things go back to normal. But what is normal now, right? What is normal now? Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful